All right, so we're diving into this NPP manifesto, and wow, it is a hefty one. I'll give them that.
It's a bit of a doorstop, yeah.
But don't worry, we're not going to bury you in political jargon here, okay? Our goal is to figure out what this thing actually means for, you know, regular Ghanaians
Yeah.
in their daily lives.
Think of it like we're translating Ghana's future into like a user manual or something.
Exactly. And since we all know you can't get much done on an empty stomach, we're starting with the pocketbook issues. Can you actually afford to live in the Ghana they're describing?
Right off the bat, they hit on the cost of living, which, let's be real, is a major pain point right now.
Yeah, no kidding. They seem to get that people are feeling the pinch.
And their big focus seems to be on public transport. They're talking about making it, like, way cheaper, not just a small discount here and there.
Okay, now that would be huge. Imagine your commute costing like a fraction of what it does now. But how are they going to make that happen? Where's the money coming from?
That's the million CD question, right? And speaking of getting around, they're also really pushing for electric vehicles.
Yeah, I saw that. Which, don't get me wrong, great for the environment and all, but it seems like a big leap for a lot of Ghanaians.
For sure. It's not like everyone can just go out and buy a brand new electric car tomorrow, right?
Exactly. But they do mention, at least in the manifesto, that they have a plan for people who are, still relying on older cars.
We'll have to wait and see what those details actually look like. But, hey, at least they acknowledge it, right?
Okay, true. So we've talked about getting around, but what about a place to live? Housing is its own beast altogether.
Absolutely. And they're actually promising to make renting more, I don't know, realistic, I guess, which is not something you typically hear from politicians here.
Right. It's usually all about home ownership, not making renting more affordable.
Exactly. So that's an interesting angle. But then there's this whole other thing where they're saying they want to use government land to, like, force developers to include affordable units in all those fancy new buildings they're putting up.
Ooh, yeah, that's a bold move. I mean, more affordable housing is desperately needed, but is that the right way to go about it?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah,
It could be a good idea, or it could backfire spectacularly. It's definitely one to watch.
definitely. And since we're on the topic of things that keep us up at night, let's talk about dumb sore. Or, well, the lack thereof, hopefully.
It's never-ending saga, right?
Right. The power situation, everyone's frustrated by it, so what's the NPP's big plan?
Well, more solar, of course. That's a given these days.
Sure, sure.
Uh,
But everyone's saying that. What else?
Okay, so this is where it gets kind of interesting. They're talking about making it easier for people to sell their excess solar power, if they have panels and all, back to the grid.
Wait, so you could actually make money off your solar panels? That's kind of cool, but can they actually deliver on that promise?
We'll see, won't we? And just to add another layer of intrigue here, they also want to break up the big power companies.
Whoa, hold on, they're going after the big guys. Now that's a statement.
Right. I mean, is this a genuine attempt to improve things or just a power play? Only time will tell.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Okay, so we talked about the cost of living, all that good stuff. But how are people actually going to make the money to afford to live in this, NPP envisioned future?
That's the key question, isn't it? Because what good is affordable housing if you can't put food on the table?
Exactly. And the NPP definitely knows that jobs are a make or break issue for a lot of voters. They come out swinging in this manifesto, boasting about creating 2.3 million jobs while they've been in charge.
2.3 million. It's a big number, no doubt about it.
It sounds impressive, right? But I gotta ask, what kind of jobs are we talking about here? Are these like sustainable jobs? And how does that number actually stack up against job creation under previous governments?
Yeah, we need that context, right? Because numbers can be deceiving.
Totally. So, okay, even with this supposed 2.3 million, they do admit that it's not enough. They're really pushing this whole, like, preparing for the fourth industrial revolution thing.
Right, which basically means like getting everyone ready for a world dominated by automation, AI, all that.
Exactly. The future is coming at us fast. So what's their grand plan to make sure Ghanaians aren't left behind?
Well, they lay out a whole bunch of skills they want to train people in. Like they specifically talk about training 1 million youth in things like coding, data analysis, that kind of stuff.
1 million youth. That's ambitious, to say the least. But again, will those skills actually lead to jobs here in Ghana?
That's the million CD question, isn't it? It's not just about creating jobs here. They also have this whole section on attracting like digital nomads. Those people who could work remotely from anywhere in the world.
Oh, yeah, that's become a thing, hasn't it? So they want to make Ghana like a digital nomad hotspot.
They're talking about special visas, the whole 9 yards,
Hmm.
trying to lure those remote workers in.
Interesting. But can Ghana really compete with, like, those established digital nomad destinations? Places with amazing internet, a low cost of living, you know what I mean?
It's a tough sell, for
Mm.
sure. And then there's the whole visa thing, which can be a nightmare in itself.
Totally. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, they also have this whole section on emerging industries.
It sounds kind of vague at first, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, what exactly does that even mean?
Well, they get into some specifics. Of course, there's green energy jobs, which is a no-brainer. But then they also mention things like aviation and even defense contracting.
Defense contracting. Now, that's not something you hear every day.
Right. It's not your typical emerging industry.
So what's the thinking there? Are they trying to, like, turn Ghana into a hub for, I don't know, military equipment manufacturing or something?
It's not entirely clear, but it seems like they're serious about diversifying the economy. And get this, they talk about training Ghanaians specifically to send them abroad for work in these industries.
Wait, hold on. I thought the whole point was to create jobs in Ghana, not send people away.
Right. It does seem a bit counterintuitive.
So is that their strategy then? Like a short-term loss for a potential long-term gain kind of thing?
It seems that way. The idea is that they'll gain skills and experience abroad, and then ideally bring that knowledge back to Ghana. Plus, there's the whole remittances angle.
Ah, right. The money sent back home. That
Mm.
does make a difference. But it's still a risky strategy. All right, we're back for the final stretch of our NPP Manifesto deep dive. We've covered the cost of living, the job market, all that good stuff. But now it's time to get into some of the, less tangible stuff.
The stuff that makes a society, well, a society.
Exactly. Because it's one thing to have a booming economy, but what's the point if everything else falls apart?
Right. You need that solid foundation.
And the MPP seems to get that, at least on paper. They have this whole section in the manifesto about building what they call the good society.
It sounds a bit like a campaign slogan, doesn't it?
It kind of does, yeah. But let's try to see past the buzzwords and figure out what they're actually proposing here.
Well, one thing that jumps out is this acknowledgement that as Ghana develops and modernizes, there's this fear of traditional values being eroded.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, are we losing something important as we move forward?
Right. And their approach to tackling this is actually quite interesting. They're putting a lot of emphasis on the role of traditional leaders, chiefs, religious groups, NGOs, that kind of thing.
So it's about getting those institutions more involved.
Yeah, and not just in a token way. They're talking about giving them a real seat at the table, making them partners in building this, as they call it, value-based society.
It's like recognizing that the government can't do everything itself.
Exactly. You need that community buy-in, that moral authority.
Yeah.
Whether it'll actually work, that's another story, but it's a different way of looking at it.
It is. And speaking of different, they also talk about offering tax breaks to Ghanaians living abroad who send money back home, remittances, but specifically to faith-based organizations.
That's a new one.
Right. I've never heard of that before.
It's an interesting idea. They're basically saying, hey, don't just send money to your family. Invest in your community.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to channel those remittances towards, like, broader social good.
Exactly. Although I do wonder how you would even begin to implement something like that without creating a whole other set of problems.
Yeah, the logistics of it all seem a bit mind-boggling. Okay, so let's move on to the social safety net. They seem pretty happy with what they've done so far.
Yeah, they do a bit of back padding, for sure.
Sure.
But they also say they want to make it even easier for people to access help when they need it.
Less bureaucracy, more technology, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Making the system more user-friendly.
Yeah,
Of course, the devil's always in the details, right?
always. And they also mention specifically helping nomadic communities, which I thought was interesting. Because, like, how do you even begin to provide a social safety net to a population that's constantly on the move?
Right, that's a whole other challenge. And
Yeah.
to be honest, they don't really get into the specifics of how they plan to do that. But it's good that they're at least acknowledging those communities.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that not everyone fits neatly into the same box. Right.
Okay, let's see. What else? Oh, on the topic of women and children, there's some of the usual stuff in there.
Right. But there were a couple of things that stood out to me.
Like what?
Well, they seem really focused on making it easier for mothers to re-enter the workforce after having children. Oh, yeah, I saw that. That's huge.
Right. Because right now, it can feel like you have to choose between being a mom and having a career.
Exactly. And it shouldn't be that way.
Exactly. So they're talking about partnering with the private sector to provide things like affordable childcare, flexible work arrangements, that kind of thing.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but we can't wrap up without talking about good governance, right? Because that's the foundation for everything else.
Absolutely. But it's also one of those things that politicians love to talk about, but it can be hard to pin down what it actually means in practice.
So what are they actually proposing?
Well, one thing that caught my eye was this whole smaller government thing.
A smaller government, that's not something you hear every day.
Right. They're talking about reducing the number of ministers, streamlining local governance, maybe even putting a cap on the size of parliament.
Wow, okay. Those are some pretty bold ideas. But again, it's all about implementation, isn't it?
Yeah,
Can they actually shrink the size of government without sacrificing essential services?
that's the billion CD caution, isn't it? And it kind of brings us back to something we've been saying throughout this whole deep dive. This manifesto is full of big promises, but they're often pretty light on the specifics of how they're going to make it all happen.
Exactly. So to our listeners, don't just take our word for it, or the NPPs for that matter. Go check out the manifesto yourselves, read it, ask the tough questions, and decide for yourselves. Are these realistic plans or just empty promises?
Because at the end of the day, the future of Ghana is in all of our hands.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.